I really appreciate everybody having me here. You can see, I know Mark Browning was on here, but he graciously recommended me to Jim. And I had originally given this for our D-Day celebration at our Lunch and Learns at the Evansville Wartime Museum, but I'm really glad I've got a little more time to go over the subject here. One thing about D-Day is it was a huge operation, and you can talk probably for hours about all the different things, but one things I want to focus on is sort of what I call the whys and why nots on some of the decisions. You could talk about exactly what happened, but a lot of times you don't really, you ask yourself the question, well, why did they do it that way? Why did they try to do this? Why did they try to do that? And I want to go over some of those things. First, a little background. One thing, this was obviously a huge operation, and it had been in the planning, for at least a couple, 3 years. Back when getting ready to do the torch landings in the fall of '42, there was a lot of arguments of what next once we got back into Africa, once we got back into Europe. And we wanted, as Americans, the chiefs of staffs wanted to possibly invade in '43. So in the one conference they had, the British were able to convince, hey, we're not ready, let's go ahead and go into Sicily and Italy. And then they started planning. They were going to say, okay, May 1944 is when we're going to get back into France. Okay. So they put together a big planning organization, and they started working out a lot of the details. Okay. And it wasn't till late '43 that this person, Eisenhower, he was actually put in charge of the whole operation. Bradley had already been designated as First Army Commander back in September '43, and then Montgomery, he was the overall ground forces commander, and he wasn't brought into the operational planning and everything until January '44. So what they put together from basically the end of '44 and getting the exact plans put together to be able to invade in June, it was a huge feat of organizational planning and getting all this figured out. So the other players on Eisenhower's staff is Ramsey, he was the overall naval commander, okay. Tedder, he was tactical air, and then you got Leigh Mallory, who was the strategic bombers, and then Beadle Smith. So if you ever watch the show Patton, Smith is in there, and some of the other players too. A couple things on the prior planning, okay. The prior planning, it was hampered by the fact that the person doing the group that were doing all the planning, they really didn't have as high of authority as really they should have, but the reason for that was that your main players, they were out fighting in the Mediterranean. They were in Italy, they were in Sicily, and once they got there, they basically did a wholesale change out of a lot of the key players, a lot of the key commanders when it came to the corps group, the corps commanders, the army commanders. When Montgomery went in there, he put a lot of his own people in there. The same with Bradley, and they wanted people with whatever experience they gained from the Mediterranean and North Africa battles. They put those into those key positions going into planning for Overlord. So the next slide here. So why Normandy? Okay, and I'm going to go between this slide and probably the next one, but some of the key thing is that the whole key to this whole planning and why they went into Normandy was they wanted to be able to build up their forces faster on the beachhead and outside the beachhead, faster than the Germans could come in and bring troops in, because it was all about keeping a good force ratio to be able to do what you want to do. They didn't want to get outnumbered, okay? From the very beginning, from planning, they had actually went from probably up in Norway all the way down through all of France, and over the last 2 years, they had tested the beach soil in secret on little night missions, and they knew exactly which beaches you could land that would have the right conditions for bringing the heavy equipment, and then the other aspects of that. Also, they were planning on using these artificial harbors since they knew they may not be able to get a port right away. And then they also looked in terms of where they could bring in airfields fairly not too far away from the beachhead, so that they could be able to rearm and refuel the tactical air forces. And then also Normandy had the port of Cherbourg, which was a significant port. And then they did not see as many, when you look at lesser defensive strength, you're looking at, when you look at the Calais area, that was a lot more fortified because of it was it was closest to England, and it was, there we go. So this right here is where the Germans expected a landing, because it would be closest to the ports here rather than Normandy. I know this is a very busy map here, but it does show where the German units were in France. Each of these squares is a division. The ones with X's on them, those are ones that are, they're not static divisions. Now they're infantry divisions, and then these red squares is where we knew where there were the German elite armored divisions. So as you look here, it looks like this was just as well defended as over here, but one thing you had to realize, the Atlantic Wall was a lot stronger here. Every foot, every mile of beach along here, most of that had, especially in this area, had fortifications that were stronger than Omaha Beach, okay? So about a year before, they decided, okay, we're going to pick Normandy as our landing, and we're going to spend a lot of time and effort to make sure the Germans think that we're going to invade right here. That was Operation Fortitude is what that was called, okay? Now one thing as you look, these rivers go across this way, okay? So if you're landing in this area right here, okay, there's a lot of opportunities for our Air Force to delay the Germans getting these troops down here to counterattack a landing. So that was very much one of the reasons why they were over here. Landing over here was a possibility, but if you would land here, they felt it was going to be easier for the Germans to come through here and bottle the Allies up. So that was one of the negatives for going over here. They did know that the Bocage country here could have good defensive benefits also, but they felt that it wouldn't be an issue in terms of breaking through the Germans before. Now that was a different story once they got in there. But in terms of the planning, this was where things were going. They wanted to bring in the airborne, and they did night drops. But the main thing I wanted to go over on here is that when you look at the terrain, the rivers, and the distance, the majority of the German troops over here, the main thing was to think that this was a diversion, and also when they did move troops, that it was going to be very difficult, and it would take many days, possibly weeks, to get a lot of units that they would be planning to bring over there, that they wouldn't show up there, and that the Allies, that we could build this up and bring our units in here faster than the Germans could bring their units in there. So one thing on the German command, okay, put yourself in the German commanders. How do you defend France? Now they had, I've got this in bold letters, Hitler, okay, so he had his fingers in everything. One of the things he always did, both with his armies and the German country, is that he liked to have multiple people and having it overlap, so not one group or person had more power than him, okay? So it was the same story when it came to where these are placed. If you notice along through here, probably with this 21st Panzer Division, that in reality was the only armored division in this whole area. There was a couple over here, but there was really only one armored division that was under direct command of a ground commander that would have been in charge of the units on defense. The rest of these armor units, very powerful units, were under a what they call a Panzer Reserve, okay? And Hitler said he had to have, they had to get permission from him to move those other units. Now, I think you've probably heard this, where Rommel really advocated keeping the Panzer units close to the beach, and the traditional, the rest of the higher German command wanted to have them back so that they could organize them and get them together and do a concentrated counterattack. So a lot of arguments on that, but the Germans ended up with a hodgepodge where some of them were close and some of them were back. So they didn't go all in on the defense right there at the beach, and then they only had a portion of them back here. So the main point there is that the Germans were a little bit disorganized, and if it was real critical to be able to do a very strong counterattack right after the Allies landed, there was only a limited amount of troops that they could get there from an armor standpoint, from terms of the tanks, to be able to counterattack within, probably 4 to 5 days. The German command also on the logistics of things, the bridges over the rivers, and also the P-47s and British Typhoons. The planning was that, from the Allies' point of view, is they would do a lot of strafing and limit the Germans to basically moving at night. One of the things, if you read about some of the pilots that would be up there, they would say, yeah, we would get up, we would fly over Normandy, and the Allied portion of the beachhead looked like a bunch of ants on an anthill. If you look over on the German side, you couldn't see anything because they would have to move at night, and they would be vulnerable to all the strafing. So Rommel saw that in Africa, and that was one of the reasons why he wanted the units real close to the beach. Okay, when you look at the overall plan, okay, here's Normandy right here, and then these ports right through here is where the initial divisions that were going through, that's where they were deployed from. And then the airborne units, they were based out in this area right here. But the idea of there was that they would bring all these things, they would bring all the units out of the ports, and they would go through cleared minefields here. These are minefields here designed to keep keep German torpedo boats and submarines away from the landing force. The British came in on this side, and then U.S. Omaha Beach, Utah Beach. When you look at the divisions for the initial landings, is you had the U.S. 1st Division and the 29th were coming in on Omaha Beach, that's the 5th Corps, and then you had the 4th Division coming in on Utah Beach over here. On the British had 3 landing beaches, Gold, Juno, right through here, and they had actually the Canadian 3rd British Division and the 50th, and then the 3rd Canadian. So they actually had probably, arguably, a little more manpower coming in on their beaches right away. And then the airborne main landings, we'll go over that here in a couple slides, but the British landed over here, airborne here. When you look at the overall amount of aircraft and landing craft, heavy bombers. There was over 4,200 landing ships, of which of those 4,200, 204 were LSTs. But there was lots of other things besides LSTs. You had ones for infantry. You had besides just the LST, but there was just a huge variety of specialized craft, bringing all the different items that you would need to get the troops and the equipment on shore. You had over 2,000 heavy bombers that came in that early morning and bombed all the positions back here. And then you actually had also, and then you had 130 ships in the naval bombardment. Okay, a few battleships, a lot of cruisers, a lot of destroyers. You had a lot of specialty craft that launched rockets and different things like that into the defenses. Okay. When you look at some of the planning they had, support and logistics, one of the key things is to be able to load all the troops there, have the specialty ships, tugboats, different things, having them come in echelons so they're all coming here for that first wave at the right time, and then everybody not getting all jumbled up and everything. You had a huge amount of planning and groups of logistical planners and everything that were put in place for over a year getting all this planned. One of the things we have at the museum, at the Wartime Museum, is we have a document that was printed up for LST captains. And what it is it was, when you look, it's on the Omaha sector, and it was a print of what the beach would look like from outside, from on the water going into the beach. And it showed all what the defenses that they knew at that time. But all that printing of all that kind of stuff, this was all top secret, and it's amazing how they kept it a secret. They kept their Operation Fortitude, that the Germans were kept from knowing that this was the prime landing, because you had a huge amount of all that paperwork going, all the planning going on, all the specialty stuff, and there wasn't really any leaks of all that. Everybody was focused, and they were able to do that and keep that Operation Fortitude going. Another thing is, one of the interesting things is when you actually got Montgomery in there and some of the key commanders, the first thing they saw is they were sort of screwing up a little bit, and their air reconnaissance in this area right here, that's where they were sending their planes over and taking photographs of us, and they immediately said, hey, you need to do photo missions of everywhere, not just here, or the Germans will figure out that that's where they were going. So there was small things like that once you've got the more commanders with experience, they were able to make some changes for the better. Okay, how critical was weather? It was very critical. Now, we think nowadays, with all the satellite weather prediction and everything, that we didn't think they had good predictive models back then. They did pretty good for what they had. The Allied weathermen, you could say, you had weather stations everywhere, so they could detect temperatures, pressure changes and stuff, and they could predict these fronts coming through. The other thing they were able to do is they looked at historical weather patterns. So when you ask, okay, why was June 5th and 7th, June 5th to the 7th, why was that a critical time? Why did they do the landings there? Well, for one thing, because of the planning, what they thought they had to have to gain a beachhead and stay on there, and to bring in reinforcements and bring in the logistical, they needed to have a close to a full moon so that the airborne could drop, and they needed to have the tide being fairly low or almost at low tide in the morning when the troops came in, because But they also needed a day where then the tide would come back in by about 11 or 12 o'clock during the day, so that the water would rise and would make it easier for the supply boats and everything bringing in ammunition, artillery, food, everything. So there was about every 2 weeks you had these conditions. So there was basically 2 times during June, there was a couple times during May. The other thing was that on the forecasting, based on history, is if you had a clear weather or the weather was clear enough to have the invasion, you would normally have close to a 7 to 8 day period, okay, where it would have been clear. And normally when you say it's going to be clear, whenever you had a storm, once that storm cleared up, historically it was close to, like I said, about 7 days of clear weather. So they know they had that guarantee. So one of the reasons why they were fairly confident to go forward on the 6th is that based on the prior history, they knew it was going to clear up. So they felt it wouldn't be another storm coming in right away. And the actual giving the barometer readings and different things like that through over the Atlantic Ocean, Scotland, and those areas where those fronts would be coming through, they were able to do that. The other thing on logistics, the amount of, it's really interesting when you look at the planning of what they had, how many tons they had to bring in, and how they planned all that with the ships that they had. They had all these schedules figured out on the boats coming in, unloading, then going back out, and they had that planned down to the different hours or whatever, because you had to do that to figure out how much ammo, how many rations, and then the reinforcement schedule. For example, one of the things that went into that is between the British, most of the time thought that the American scale of supply was more than it needed to be. And that was based on a little bit of our standard of living versus Britain versus the rest of Europe. So for example, each American soldier received almost 6.25 pounds of rations per day is what all the supply plans were based on. They only consumed about 4 pounds, so there was actually, even though there was 2 pounds wasted all the time, that was what we built all the logistic plans around. Now, the average German one was only about 3.25 pounds. It was a little different there. And then another interesting statistic is that for a rifle company, the normal German supply for a rifle company, they had almost twice as amount of ammunition versus food, where a lot of ours was a lot of food and we had less ammunition. But one of the things we had is we focused a lot of our logistics on our artillery also, because it was very good, and we were all very mobile too, all the trucks and everything. So it was a little different, but even we did have a very high standard, and there was a lot of stuff that on the supply side that they put forth, to land on, and to land on D-Day and to keep the troops supplied. Okay, so the invasion sectors. This is the Normandy coast. This was the boundary here between the British and us, and this is Omaha Beach right here. This is where they landed. Dog sector, Easy sector, Fox sector, and then this is Utah over here. Gold Juno Sword is where the British landed right here. Okay, one of the things here, this is an actual picture, the 16th Infantry, the 1st Infantry Division, Fox Green Beach. Now you can see one of the issues with the Omaha landings was that look how long that beach is, okay? It's very wide, okay? And then you got these bluffs up here. So even though you had a lot smoke screen and everything, they had to traverse a very long distance going in. This is a picture of some of the a typical naval gun type of casement there, where those were there to to take out landing craft. Okay, so we hear a lot about the airborne. If you've watched the movie Band of Brothers, you get a very well done show. The airborne, you actually had 3 full airborne divisions coming in. Okay, and what the airborne is supposed to do, they're supposed to come in, they're supposed to take the ground and hold the ground. All the airborne